Hello there, my name is Noah, and I'm here alongside my co-hosts Em.
Hey.
And Rob.
Hey there.
We are the hosts of Fax Machine, a podcast by and for people who are curious about everything, but especially the things that make them laugh. To our profound and everlasting joy, we are joined in this episode by Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy.
Yeah.
All right. That is the warmest pandemic welcome that exists. So thank you very much.
You don't want it to be too warm. This wasn't a feverish welcome.
Yeah. This isn't hotspot welcome. Yeah.
We do, of course, have to say, because our audio probably sounds so good. It sounds like we're all in the same room, but we definitely are not. This is Zoom recorded, socially distanced. So nobody out there has to be concerned for our safety.
Yes.
Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited that you're here.
Thank you for having me.
So for our listeners who don't already know you, I just want to go down the list of the many things that are astoundingly cool about you. You are a data science professor at NYU, and in fact, the director of undergraduate studies at the NYU Center for Data Science, a comedian of both the standing up and improvisational varieties, and also a worldwide circus performer. And I think the question the three of us are dying to ask is, how? How have you
I thought you were going to say why, but okay, great. Yeah.
No, that's immediately clear. Those are amazing things. Anybody who can combine them all, it's self-evident. But how did you achieve all these incredible things? Please teach us.
Yes. The secret is make a series of terrible decisions and then grapple with that decision by moving into a totally unrelated field. And I think all three fields are great, but they all have profound miseries associated, right? Like you're all in science and you get that it can be rough. It's wonderful, but it can be pretty soul-crushing. And so I go to circus, which makes me feel better about like life, and it's fun, but it's so physically painful that you're like, feel like you're gonna die. And then comedy is really fun because you can just say whatever is on your mind, but then sometimes audiences really hate that, and you question your entire worth as a human. And so then you're like, you know what I'm going to do? Science. And you go back around. And that is what happens. So instead of therapy, you can just do, or honestly, in addition to, I'm very busy. So in therapy, mostly.
In therapy. You're busy with therapy
I'm
mostly.
so busy with therapy right now. And I really wish I was exaggerating.
Yeah.
I feel like there are some people who take the kind of physicality of circus and like the brutal honesty of comedy, and they just become CrossFit instructors. And that's like a twofer. Yeah.
I could have saved myself a lot of time and money by just doing CrossFit instead of all this. Yeah. Fewer tips, I think, in CrossFit compared to comedy where we used to pass around a beer bucket. So
that's fair. Yeah.
I honestly thought you meant by tips unsolicited advice, but possibly as well.
That's
plenty of that in CrossFit.
Yeah.
I'd have to imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot of unsolicited advice in comedy. That's true. My best advice I ever got was some guy after a show came up to me and he said, you know, you're a very funny person. And I said, oh, well, thank you. And he said, but your jokes are not good. What are you referring to in the former part? And then he tried to convert me to Scientology. It was one of the highlights of my comedy career. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm a member. I don't know if that was what you wanted me to start talking about now or later. Sure. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and this, just want to jump in to say this podcast is sponsored by Dianetics.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, that's amazing, and we are, I mean, if I haven't said enough, very, very excited that you're here. And so in every episode of Fax Machine, each of us shares one fascinating fact along with the incredible story behind it, and finally, we wrap things up with a pub-style trivia quiz loosely inspired by the theme. This week, our theme is language, the extraordinary way we communicate and fail to communicate with each other. Em, take it away.
This week, I learned that you won't get a curse from the Witch of Agnesi, but you can get a curve.
Ooh.
That's because the Witch of Agnesi is no witch at all, but rather a cubic plane curve described by an equation named after 18th century mathematician Maria Gaetana Agnesi. So, to preface, Going in, I was a little unsure as to whether our theme would be more languagey or mathy for reasons that you will see over the course of everyone else's facts. So mine is maybe like 80% mathy and 20% languagey, but is also very thoroughly silly. So I'm hoping that that'll kind of buffer.
And you're using a lot of language to describe this, so
Yes.
We said that math is the universal language, so
exactly.
It's still very much on
yes.
theme.
Yeah. The universal language and my innate wordiness, I think, will also supply our listeners with far more language than they probably were coming into this morning. So there you go.
Excellent.
Words. Okay. So to minimize the time that I spend describing, or at least attempting to describe a geometric concept over radio, which I know is normally riveting listening, but I figure we have other things to cover today.
It has its ups and downs, I think.
Yeah.
Excellent.
If you're
we got time, Phil.
so dumb.
Go.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say, well, if you need someone to co-sign on this topic,
I love it.
don't go off on a tangent.
Yes. I'm loving the arc of this fact already.
Yes. I was stuck on radius, so I couldn't go anywhere. Yeah.
Ooh, nice.
Your facts are secant to none.
Wow.
Ooh. Beautiful.
That's your tagline.
That was elegant. But so to kind of picture this sort of witch of Agnesi, I would ask you to picture like a hill or a normal distribution, basically just like an image of a peak in the middle with symmetrical tapering kind of at either end. And then basically to derive the witch sort of from that scenario, you plug in information like the diameter of a circle underneath that peak, as well as the distance between the center of that circle and a point towards an end of like the curve that's going, that includes the peak, into an equation. And then that equation describes a section of the curve, and that section is called the witch. So if you're still listening, thank you. Please stick with us. I promise to never do that again. Okay, so this equation struck me not for mathematical reasons. And in fairness, I've yet to have anything strike me for mathematical reasons, but I'll never say never. But rather because it's such a weird kind of silly name for something that at least on its surface is pretty like just, uninteresting, or not necessarily uninteresting. I'm sure plenty like of geometrists, people who do math might disagree with me. But regardless, it's a pretty wacky name. That certainly does not suggest what it actually is. And it should be noted that the curve was not originally named a witch. And it's also very funny to kind of like read articles like about the equation, because they literally just kind of like to calculate the witch. And it's like, it's a piece of a line. But essentially, it actually gained that moniker after an English mathematician later mistranslated Agnesi's original work, swapping the Italian word for turn with the word for witch, which had, at least at that time, a similar spelling. And I will say Maria probably would have been displeased with this kind of like heretical moniker for essentially like her life's work, given that she was incredibly pious. And right after publishing 2 calculus textbooks that would cement her academic legacy, she basically quit her scholarship, even after the Pope invited her to like have some sort of like position within the Vatican that was like the math scholar of the church. She was like, nah, I'm good. But she quit her scholarship to devote herself entirely to religious good works and theological study. So
she turned the Pope down to do religious work?
She did. She was like, don't waste my time with more of this math. Like,
wow. You're like, I'm too pious for you, most pious person in the world.
Exactly. It's like,
all right.
Pope, get your head
was
in.
it Pope Pius?
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been a flex. Stunting on Pope Pius for not being pious. I like it. But in looking into
stunting on Pope Pius. It's a great phrase.
I'm so excited to see that taken out of context.
Yeah.
Stunting is a habit.
Oh.
But in looking into this further, I noticed that, like, in general, mathematical objects and proofs and theorems can have some pretty, like, zany, goofy names in the sciences. Like, we've talked a lot on the podcast about nomenclature in astronomy and genetics. And even for like taxonomy and insects, just in terms of like the peculiarity in the rules or lack of rules that sort of constrain how nomenclature works in those fields, as far as I can tell, math is just like on a completely different sphere of absurdity as far as that goes. Like the kind of names that you encounter for stuff in mathematics can just run the full gamut of fantastical to what could this possibly even mean. So given that, I would like to issue a mini quiz wherein I'll give you guys 4 names of math things, 3 of which are real and 1 of which I've made up. And you'll have to guess which one is made up. To our, I assume, hordes of math nerds listening, this is your time to shine. And I am so happy for you.
Is there some kind of giveaway for listeners? Get some podcast merch or anything?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, yeah.
Yes, there is
we
now.
had a lot of buttons.
Damn it.
Yeah, you cannot edit that part out. Fans deserve recognition.
The first person to hear this and text any one of us an answer, you'll get something.
Nice.
But do it before you hear the answer, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Scout's honor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We trust you guys.
I'm going to win this t-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm signing in right now.
You got a big advantage here.
All right. So,
Okay.
question 1. So which of these is not a real proof, object, theorem, what have you in mathematics? The Menger sponge, the infinite earring, Mandelbrot's top hat, or Fatou's pancake?
Okay, so I'll just jump in. Mandelbrot's top hat. I'm a big Mandelbrot fan. I'm a Mandelbro, you could say.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But so he's the fractal guy. He makes fractals, and top hats are fractally, and that sounds real.
I mean, we're going to have a bunch of Mandelbros calling in, correcting the record.
Yeah.
What were the other options again?
The Menger sponge, the infinite earring, Fatou's pancake.
And only one of these is fake?
Only one is fake. I told you. They put Sonic Hedgehog to shame.
I mean, I'll pick the sponge one. I can imagine like a cool sort of like some sort of equation that gives you like a holy plane. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like some certain like little sort of vaguely hole-like regions are not
divots or
valid.
something. Yeah.
These all sound fractal to me, honestly. But
yeah.
So the pancake is the least fractally one. So I think pancake.
I was thinking that too, but then I thought maybe M wouldn't put the fake one last, right?
Yeah.
But maybe then she would because we would all think that.
Game theory of trivia.
Exactly. I originally thought infinite earring sounded pretty right, but I'm having trouble actually picturing what that would be, other than like just a hoop earring that's a circle or something. Which and there's also a lot of men in mathematics typically, so maybe they wouldn't be naming things earrings, though the witch obviously got involved.
That might be how they misunderstood the shape of the earrings.
Like, no idea what an earring looks like. Yeah. Yeah, so all right, I'm going to say that's the fake one, infinite earring. I've talked myself into it.
Okay. Have we all picked a different one?
Rob's going top hat.
I'm going pancake.
Yeah, you think top hat's real. Yeah.
Okay, so Rob says pancake. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, I think I said sponge was real.
You did.
Oh, no, I'm saying sponge is not real.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying now.
Okay. You're all wrong. It was the top hat.
Damn it.
Rob, you did exactly what I hoped you would do in terms of just kind of like.
Oh, it's so good.
Be like, that sounds real and that looks real. Man.
Wow.
Because that is the shape that he is really famous for. It's just kind of like the not sawtooth, but just kind of the square coming out of itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which is how...
Maybe he should have called it a top hat. It'd be a little bit catchier. Have some more Mandelbros rolling around.
That's how radio antennas initially worked. It increased the surface area of radio antennas that were just straight lines. They made those little tooth shapes, and the teeth had teeth on them, and they increased the surface area so dramatically that you got a better signal. It's not a real thing, though. Teeth on teeth.
Teeth on teeth.
All right, another t-shirt.
Yeah.
Teeth on teeth. Fax machine.
Everyone's like, is it a dentistry podcast? What's going on?
All right. Question 2. So it's all good. Got 2 more questions still. Here are the 4 options. The house with 2 rooms, the do-a-day rabbit, 2 tori glued along a strip, Mobius striptease.
All right, resist, everyone.
I mean, I can't tell if we're being baited or not.
So I think 3 is just too poorly worded to be fake.
Yeah. The only thing I was thinking was maybe you did something evil and changed it from like strip to stick or so, you know what I mean? Like it actually basically is it, but you got it a little bit wrong. I like how my theme in trivia is I don't trust the game. That's like all that's happened for me so far.
That's fair. I think I have there's no particular reason why this must be right, but I have something that's going to guide my choice here. And the third one was 2 tori glued to a...
Glued along a string. Yeah.
I am thinking that looks a lot like beads on a string. And you are like you study chromatin, like sort of chromatin, don't you? And that's like a chromatin phrase when you, I don't know, if you like look at, what is it called? It starts with an H.
Histones?
Histones, yeah.
If you look at like histones with DNA wrapped around them and then they separate it, they look like, quote, beads on a string. And I think you repurposed beads on a string and invented number 3.
Wow. That is some psychology. You're the neuroscientist, right? You can figure it. You're like, they found connection. I don't know how neuroscience works, and I don't know what a histome is or whatever.
But it definitely gives you mind reading powers, so yes. I'm with Noah.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, and the Mobius striptease at first, obviously, right? But then I was like, that seems like the sort of thing that mathematicians could do. I'm really generalizing about mathematicians, like to think that they're being funny, like, oh, we'll call that, and, and it's in some footnote, and they love it and chuckle at their conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look at us.
It's like I'm
we're so silly.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Noah on this. It's the beads on a stick or whatever.
Yeah. Tutorial.
Okay. I was curious to see how this one would go. You guys give me entirely too much credit. It was absolutely Mobius striptease.
Wow.
Dang.
Wow.
I just frankly, I'm disappointed in you.
Yeah. I expected more.
Honestly, I was floating it to kind of like gauge its potential as a Halloween costume idea because I thought of that and was like, that's hilarious.
Yeah. Finally, a sexy.
Not sure how it would play out, but I know, right? I feel like there's not much else happening in that space.
Well, there is a sexy mathematics concept, and that is the concept of sexy primes.
Oh yeah,
and those are prime numbers that are 6 integers apart, and that's it.
Really?
And they're yeah.
Okay.
Sexy primes are prime numbers that differ from each other by 6. So,
is it
for
a pun on
5 and 11? It is a pun coming from the Latin word for 6, which is sex.
Is it sexy like SEXI, sexy prime?
It's SEXY.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's not that Latin, is it? See, we're all about language in this episode.
Yeah.
Dig it.
God. All right.
Nice. But also kind of like along that sort of same headspace of kind of like suggestive mathematical phrases, I also encountered one that was just space filling curves, which was a little like, ooh, okay. Yeah. You space fill those curves,
Wow.
Anyways. Yeah. Very good. And the last one. All right. The Coke snowflake, Cantor's leaky tent, the pseudo-rhombicubo-octahedron, and the Loch Ness Monster.
Hang on a second. The first question, which one was wrong?
Mandelbrot's top.
Never mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Were you just thinking
also, I should
always the last one? Yeah. I was like, is that the pattern?
Also,
again, not engaging with the trivia itself, but finding other things to think about. Yes.
Also to clarify, realizing how this sounds read out compared to how it reads, the Coke snowflake, Coke is spelled like Koch brothers, not like cocaine snowflake.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here's how I imagine the mathematical Loch Ness Monster. It's a function where it's basically like sinusoidal, and anytime it is negative, it is 0. Like somehow that would be incorporated. So it just looks like, and then, wait, here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how I'm imagining it, because that looks like that picture.
For the listeners, that was a hell of a hand gesture. So maybe make a GIF of that for folks.
Really, really painted a picture.
It really, very monstery, I have to say.
See, I thought you were doing a Mobius striptease.
Okay, I'm doing one right now. Oh, listeners, you are missing out.
Fashion number 1, off the rails. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we were trying to find the one that wasn't real, and we decided that one sounds real.
Yeah,
so.
I'm completely persuaded about the monster. Yeah.
Ruled one out. Okay.
Leaky tent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down with that. Leaky
Yeah,
tent
I can't
sounds-
picture what's
Okay.
going on with the leaky tent.
All
In
right.
mathematics, I understand perfectly the concept otherwise, to be clear. Quite on top of the idea.
Yeah, circus performers are pretty
Oh, yeah.
confident on the idea of tents.
Yeah.
True tent expert.
Yeah, and we have no mathematics to help us with the leaks, so it's clearly false.
So I was a little mean with this one.
Oh, damn.
They're all real.
That is mean.
Including
Yep, that
the
is mean.
pseudo rhombic cubooctahedron. But just to emphasize, I was actually kind of expecting you guys to be like, oh, Loch Ness Monster, that one's easy, but that is a real thing.
Right.
And Noah, as you sort of described / pantomimed it, that is exactly what it is.
Oh,
in
cool.
terms of like a shape.
What does the leaky tent look like?
It is based on intersecting angles. The idea is that like if you break sort of one of the lines that forms it, then like the entire thing collapses, or like that was what I got from the gist of the article. So like it is
also true in circus.
that you can poke holes in it. Hey,
Yeah.
that sounds intense. There
It is
we go.
intense. Oh, Jesus Christ.
It's like, how did I miss that? How did I miss that?
Oh man.
Ooh,
There
we
we
gotta
go.
go lie down.
But yeah, but just to kind of show that like, you know, there's all sorts of like kind of quirky, wondrous stuff to be encountered in mathematics. And I want to shout out too that all of these came from going through a really cool blog on Scientific American called Roots of Unity. It's written by science writer Evelyn Lamb, and I've honestly not encountered like that many articles that just take a really obscure mathematical concept and make it approachable and interesting and kind of break it down to the history and etymology. So kudos, like Evelyn or Evelyn for doing that and making that a thing that people can check out. And I highly recommend they do. In particular, listeners to our show, I think will be especially drawn to her column. If nothing else, I think best exemplified by the fact the subheader for the article about the Loch Ness Monster is "They did the math. They did the monster math."
Wow.
This week I learned that communication itself, including all language, can be traced along a spectrum. And one of the most interesting points on that spectrum is a form of communication called Yerkish.
Yerkish.
Yeah.
Yerkish. I am intrigued.
Yeah. And so
Yay.
this was, so I want to tell you, in looking up what I wanted to talk about for this kind of languagey episode, I had this just hint of an idea that all communication is on a spectrum. And this was something I'd read about, basically that there's an evolutionary path of how humans have language, and that there are like lesser forms of language that other animals use, that basically are proto-communication, proto-languages, iconic or acted behaviors. On this podcast, Noah has talked about how bees dance to communicate, which is like a really cool and totally different form of communication, and I think the only one in invertebrates. I was thinking language stuff, and then I was like, you know what, but language is still evolving. You can kind of trace back our language and behavior to our to other species, and no other species have language the way that humans do, but we are trying kind of actively. And so there are labs around the world who are working on communication with primates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get to this language called Yerkish. And Yerkish is, first of all, just such a good name. Like,
It's such a good name.
Yep, because it's just like it's not a classy language by any means. It's very Yerkish. But
Well, when you first said it, I was like, do you mean Turkish? What are we talking about?
Well, I also, when you created this image of like scientists in a lab trying to teach animals to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining like sort of the, what is it, My Fair Lady?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
The
like-
rain
but like
in
just-
Spain.
Yeah, but like to some mollusks, and you're like, she sells
Yeah.
seashells by the seashore.
and the mollusk
And
is
they're
like, sure, it's
Yeah.
like, you're saying it wrong.
The mollusk is
Yeah.
like, actually, that's really insensitive, and I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I am
Yeah.
not going to be
They're just
commodified.
like,
Wow.
Yeah.
They're so good at
I'm
talking.
not for sale.
I mean, in that case, the ends justified the means. I mean, that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
seashell clearly responded in perfect English.
Yeah.
Gotta rile them up.
It's like that joke, two muffins are in an oven, and one muffin says, damn, it's getting hot in here. And the other one says, holy shit, a talking
Oh,
muffin.
shit.
Yeah.
because that joke isn't told enough.
No, it's not. I forgot about that joke.
Sorry. So
Fun times.
Yerkish.
Yerkish.
So Yerkish is basically animal language. And the interesting thing about this is that it was developed by scientists communicating with chimpanzees, and it's a symbolic language. It's a series of lexicograms that they can use to communicate. They can also be a good number of primates can communicate using hand signs or sign language. But there is a definitive bias of basically English language structure so far on how we communicate with animals. And the second strongest kind of language influence is probably Chinese. And they're very different kind of language bases. So there's this kind of, it's not really a war by any means, but there's this kind of tension between like the language structures that we will use to try to communicate with primates if we want to do it more broadly.
If that's the thing that the U.S. and China go to war over, I'm almost totally fine with it. Because that would mean that we are in such a place in the world that that's the thing that's like getting us all heated up.
Well, I don't know whose idea it was to send the monkeys as ambassadors.
Yeah.
That was never going to end well.
Yeah. Like, we trained these monkeys in English, and they trained them in Chinese. Like, what were we thinking? These are our ambassadors.
You need a third monkey who just knows both, and he
Yeah.
just sits there and
Translated.
That's amazing.
I want that as a sitcom now.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, it's so bad.
But
It's like it's the UN and they're translating, but they're monkeys. Like, that's the whole plot, basically.
But so Yerkish is kind of built on this idea that's sort of similar, that basically great apes have a language that we just cannot crack into or communicate using or really decode, but that we can teach them basically the symbolic meaning of things, and they can internally amongst each other and then externally to us translate. And so great ape language is a study of how apes are communicating, and then Yerkish is how we get a glimpse into that. And so I want to tell you about Kanzi, who is a male bonobo and basically is the most literate primate who's not a human. Kanzi is fluent in Yerkish, knows, I think, at a minimum 150 symbols that they can communicate with, and possibly more, and also understands the context in which we use those symbols. And so Kanzi, I believe, lives in Des Moines, Iowa, in a conservation site there, the Ape Cognition Conservation Initiative, the ACCI. And they are able to communicate really complicated ideas for an animal. And so they use, like, we may be familiar with primates using hand signs to say, like, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, to communicate like very basic needs. Kanzi's vocabulary is a little bit stronger. And so I want to give you a few of the anecdotes about Kanzi, one of which is really interesting. So you may have heard of Haka, which is the Maori war dance, or the Maori war dance. So there was a Haka performer who was invited to come perform for the primates in the language center. For reasons unknown, actually. I couldn't quite figure out why this person was invited or what that was all about.
Why not?
Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds sick.
I'm on board.
And so he started to perform, and Kanzi watched the performance calmly. He said other primates got a little agitated because it is a kind of aggressive sort of dance. It's a war dance, and it involves slapping and baring your teeth and kind of like very ritualistic actions. And afterward, he communicated to his trainer, Sue Savage Rumba, using his vocalizations, which she could interpret. And basically, he said he would like you to do it again just for him in a room out back so that the others won't get upset.
Wow.
Oh.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
That is so cool.
it's like such a
And
nuanced...
thoughtful. What a gentleman.
Yeah.
You know?
And so, and like, again, like there's a big kind of asterisk on all of these that these are anecdotes and not
Right.
not really well studied. But Kanzi also like would demonstrate like the science for fire and marshmallows. And he would do that, and then he would get sticks and break them into little twigs to be like, let's roast the marshmallows now.
Wow.
Like a very
Yes.
procedural...
The evolution from language to s'mores continues perfectly. Yes.
And then he said in perfect English, but Hershey's, please. And
Yeah.
Wow.
the final thing about Kanzi is that he knows how to play Pac-Man. Like, understands the game Pac-Man, the rules of Pac-Man, how to use like the Atari joystick, and like can avoid the ghosts and eat all the dots. Like he gets Pac-Man.
He's probably better at it than I am. That's like I would assume it would be the situation where you show a dog a mirror and you're just like not aware that anything's going on. Yeah.
And I'm really glad you mentioned dogs, because that's how I want to end this. That this idea of Yerkish communication with animals, and Yerkish is again like a lexigram or a symbolic kind of communication. The idea that this is possible by using symbols and sounds that go together is something that the internet has shown us is possible with other non-primate animals. And we may have chatted about this a little bit, but there is a Twitter presence of a dog named Bunny. Are you familiar with Bunny?
No. Oh, yes.
Yeah. So
that it is at least alleged that Bunny can like understand human speech and then press a series of buttons like that are arranged on a map, sort of a mat on the ground, that like then audio for a certain word comes up.
Yeah.
And Bunny will supposedly hit a series of the little buttons to make responses or tell Bunny's owners what they want.
Bunny is incredible. Whoa. And so Bunny has been trained by her parents from a very young age, but can communicate things by pressing buttons. And she presses the button that's in a specific place and is often a specific color. That will then actually press like the easy button at Staples, but it'll say the word. So it should be like outside now. And then the mom will come over and be like, no, outside later.
Wow.
And then Bunny will be like, okay, love, mom. like
all these animals are so polite. Wow. Like none of them are jerks. I'm so relieved to hear this. This N of 2 is conclusive. But,
we're the virus.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I think I'm surprised that it was, Bunny said outside now, and mom said, oh, no, not now, sorry. Yeah. And then Bunny said, I said.
Yeah.
Bunny's like,
now.
You'll be sorry.
Yeah. Death to mom.
But so the owners of Bunny have they have a website that's called fluent.pet, and on it they promote another website called theycantalk.org. And so fluent.pet actually sells the button maps and gives like a way to say like start with these 4 buttons and then train and then work up, and like you can have your pet speaking. And so thousands of people have bought the pet maps from fluent.pet. So there's a chance that dogs are learning like in this very like, because people, okay, my girlfriend's mom has a dog and is like the worst dog, and I hope she doesn't listen to this, I'm really sorry, Denise. She's the worst dog trainer ever. Like whenever the dog does something wrong, she'll say a different negative word. She'll be like, no, stop, bad, you idiot, come on. Like there's like no reinforcement there.
Sounds like Biden stubbing his toe.
Yeah.
Oh, no, stop, man.
Yeah.
Come on,
Jack.
Come on, Jack.
But yeah, so basically, there's a lot of people who are now like training, or could be training their pets to communicate using actual English pronounced words with buttons. That then, and it's a great reinforcement because the dog presses the button, hears the sound, and sees the response. Right. So they can basically there's a training element like to the human and the dog of being like the dog keeps hitting the food button, or the dog keeps hitting random buttons, but when it hits food, I give it food, and like there's a really good reinforcement there that we don't have otherwise.
Right.
Okay, so, I was about to say like this. I mean, not just because it's dogs, but I'm like, this has to be Pavlovian in terms of like how this could work, and that like, which I mean, admittedly, is still kind of interesting. Where it's just like maybe the dog just like learns that the sequence of like "I love you" like makes the human happy, and is like, I'll just press these to make the human happy.
Right. But I mean, we know that the dogs can figure those things out and like figure out how to spell like WALK and stuff like that. Like they can put it together. Well, and it's making me think of like when we try to teach language to computers, right? And we're pretty good at, getting computers to talk to us, but the frontier that no one can figure out is how to get them to actually understand. They're just really advanced dogs at this point, right? Where they just memorize. Take that, computer that I'm talking into right now. Advanced dog.
Sorry, your audio cut out there for a second, and then it said, computers are great.
Yeah.
Computers are excellent.
We rule everything, which might be true. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, okay. My association with the chimpanzee-like animals, I know you said it was a bonobo, but is what I think everyone would agree is the touchstone of chimpanzees in language. It's like if you put chimpanzees in like a room with a typewriter, right? Would they eventually write the works of Shakespeare?
Yeah.
And something that brings me so much joy is that this is not purely a theoretical question, because some people actually put
Yes,
monkeys
I know
in
this
a
study,
room.
and I love it so much. Yes.
Can I jump in and say I think that the typewriter is really the limiting step here, because it requires a certain, like, if it was just like random letter tiles on the wall, they'd have a better chance. But I think typewriters are a little
I see.
nuanced.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you what happened. So it was in 2002. These were students. I guess maybe it was a student project in collaboration with faculty from University of Plymouth Media Lab Arts course. They got a £2,000 grant from the Arts Council to study the literary output of real monkeys. And so they put a computer keyboard in the enclosure of basically 6 macaques in Devon, in England, and they basically then were able to sort of like link that keyboard to, I guess, the internet, and the results were posted on a website. The monkeys did not just produce nothing. What they did was, among other things, 5 total pages largely consisting of the letter S.
Yes.
The lead male macaque started bashing the keyboard with a rock, and other monkeys just pooped on it,
Yeah.
and eventually the keyboard got so clogged up with shit that it wasn't usable anymore. And one of the takeaways that it's actually quite a good point about this sort of thought experiment of like the monkeys and the typewriter is that monkeys aren't random letter generators. According to somebody involved in the project, they are much more complex than random sort of letter generators. They were very interested in what was happening on the screen, and they saw that when they typed a letter, something happened. So there was a level of intention. And basically then, as soon as they were like seeing there was a result, there was never going to be like we just let them go for 1 billion years, and then maybe, you know what I mean? It was always going to be some pattern sort of coming out of their consciousness and their excitement at seeing letters come out, which wasn't random. But you can actually see everything that they typed, and I can share this link. Actually, I'll go ahead and share it in the Zoom just so we have it now.
Oh, that's amazing. I have not seen that.
Forget. It's there in the chat, and it says so it's actually in sort of like book layout format. It's Notes Toward the Complete Works of Shakespeare by Elmo, Gum, Heather, Holly, Mistletoe, and Rowan. Silhouette crested macaques from Paignton Zoo Environmental Park, and it. Yeah, it's got like copyrights and everything, and it starts for many pages.
Wow.
And then it ends with the line. In fact, we can all probably say it together. Nah.
Oh, that's so great.
You know that we all had to read that play in school. But I thought that was amazing. And I think it's such a great idea to take that kind of thing. Everybody's heard about that, but these people tried it.
That's so amazing.
At the end, they have an about the authors.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, my God, I missed that.
Yeah, like pictures of all the macaques.
Oh, my God.
Little, like, bios.
I mean, all the pictures, they're just like, it's just chaos. Like, they're just ripping at the keyboard.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in Britain, a cancer research lab didn't get a grant refunded.
Yeah.
Too close to home.
I would have had a better chance if the monkeys had written the grant.
So, very excited to be on the theme of language. And actually, Rob, your facts about Yerkish and teaching language to animals is related to where we're going, which is one of the things that I really like thinking about is the rules and statistical properties of language. And actually, your focus on distributions early on is also exactly tied in to where we're going. So I'm building up suspense. So what I want to talk about is something called Zipf's law. It does not roll off the tongue in any way. Zipf's law. Have you all heard of Zipf's law before I started
No.
carrying on about it? Okay, great. Because it's the best. And it would be not as fun if you were like, yeah, we already know about it. I'm like, well, I have nothing else to say to you. So how about power law distributions?
I had to do them in a class once, and I haven't thought about them since.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So Em, I was so excited also because when you said, all right, think about a normal distribution. So most of the time in statistics and in a lot of science, we begin from the premise that something is normally distributed, right? Mm-hmm. Power law distributions, or Zipfian distributions, which you can call them, are basically the long tail distributions where it's any phenomenon that some events are really, really large and then the vast majority are really, really small. So if you think about something like wealth distribution isn't quite right, but that's the idea. A few people are crazy wealthy and the rest of us are not. It turns out that one of the earliest discoveries of power laws, and those they apply to all kinds of things, and we can talk about those, but one of the earliest places where humans discovered power laws was in language. And it's known because of someone named George Kingsley Zipf, who wrote a book in 1949 about this distribution of words in English, where he said there are some words in English that are used all of the time and a whole bunch of words that are barely used. And the most common words are used according to a very specific pattern. So let me see if I can get this right. So basically, the most common word, what do you think the most common word in the English language is?
The.
Very good. Okay. So the is used twice.
I think it's the most common word used in what is the most common word in
what is
the English
most
language.
Common word in the
Yeah.
There we go. Dead giveaway.
Unless I had said what word is the most common word.
Then it'd be tied.
It would be tied. And that would
Oh wait, what word is the most common word in the
what about an English language? Okay. I'm just trying to break Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Linguistic renegade. So the is used twice as much as the next most common word.
That is the case in your sentence.
Yes.
2-1. This is amazing.
This is amazing. And it's a law for a reason. All right. So what's the second most common word? What do you guys think?
A?
Yeah, I mean.
It's not. I have to check because I can never remember.
The word is not is the second most?
No, it's of. Of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, of. So the occurs twice as often in any sufficiently large random sample of English words, right? Or like text or anything you can think of. Novels, newspapers, tweets, whatever you want, right? So the occurs twice as often as the word of. And it occurs 3 times as often as the third most popular word, and 4 times more often as the fourth most popular word, and 5 times more often as the fifth, all the way down to create this very, very, very long tail distribution. So hang on. So what's the third most popular word? We'll stop after 3, but we could keep going for the rest of this podcast, just naming words in order of popularity. So the, of...
In?
Interesting guess. I feel like any word I say, you're going to be like, oh, it's that word. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I kind of want to use something else that's has a utility, like an article, like a or an or something.
Yeah.
We already said the.
The is the most common and third most common word in English. It's incredible, that word.
It's so many times on the list.
It could be like if you pronounce the or the, and then maybe it actually would show up. M is correct. It's and. So the, and.
And, right.
Yeah. I'm always surprised. I can never remember of, because that seems odd that it's so high up, right? But I think because and being a conjunction, you don't necessarily have... Anyway, I don't know which words come after that, but they're all very, very short words, which is also related to the law. So the exciting thing about this is that when it was first discovered, people were like, oh, that's pretty curious, and then checked a million other texts, and it was very exciting to find that it worked in any text that you could think of. And one of the things I do... at NYU is I teach natural language processing, and I make my students go in and pull any text they can think of, and it's even eerier if you do your own. Like I just pull my own emails that I've written or like just random stuff, and the law works perfectly without you even thinking about it, that it follows this big power law distribution.
Wow.
The other
Are there people
thing,
that are there people that deliberately try to subvert the law when they write books? Because I know that there's a book, I can't remember much about it, so it's not going to be very good for the podcast, but there's some book where they try to avoid using the letter E, and it's very painful.
A book or an episode of Gilmore Girls?
Painful.
Is there
an anti-E episode of Gilmore Girls?
Oh man, this is a deep cut, but at one point Rory infiltrates like a secret society at Yale, and they have this like ridiculous gala in the middle of the woods, and like a bunch of them are playing this game whose conceit is to speak without using the letter E.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a Ernest Vincent Wright book, Gadsby, which doesn't include the letter E, whatever, and it's like 50,000 words, I believe. Like,
wow.
And I looked
cow.
this up this week because I was wondering if it's the same for letters, because E is like the most common letter in the English language and in The Price is Right. And like, I don't know if it's a power law difference, but definitely if you're doing like the cryptoquote game and the crossword puzzle, the most
Right.
common letter is always E. And that's
Right.
like how you start it.
Right. Which is why eel is constantly an answer in the New York Times crossword puzzle, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like the number of ways they've described a long, slimy fish is impressive.
Yep. And eek. Oh, I hate that one.
Oh, yeah.
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 I don't like that one either. My friend in college, either the M or the N on her keyboard stopped working, and she like, rather than get it fixed, she was just like, I'm not going to use that letter anymore. And it was like rare. It must have been M. Like, it was rare enough that you could like kind of get away with it. So E is hard, but like she got pretty far. Her name is Nuralima though, and there's an N and an M.
My Z key got stuck, which is perfect, because I was like, if I ever use it, I'll just spell things like a British person, and like no one will ever know.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, so here is another cool thing about Zipfian distribution. So everyone was very excited that it worked for English. And then they looked at a whole bunch of other languages, and it turns out it works for a long time, we thought all languages. And it works, there's some pretty cool graphs, even if you just look at Wikipedia, where it just works perfectly for like, not to live in European languages again, but like all of them. And it works exactly right. So different words, but it's the exact same pattern where there's one word that's used a ton, and then it's twice as much as the next and 3 times as much as the next. And that rule totally follows.
Can I ask, like, so in a language that has like gendered words,
Yeah.
like, so you have 2 thes, well, a male and a female. Are they combined and considered together? Or is there, because they're cut in half, there's a new word that's on top?
That's a good question. I don't think there's any of what we would call like pre-processing, like kind of standardizing or glomming words together. Like in English, like a and an, you could imagine putting those together realistically. I don't think it's that. It's just the raw text. It totally works. So I would imagine in Spanish, maybe it's being gendered myself, but like L probably shows up slightly more than la or something like that. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that it's the whole thing. Like,
and maybe by having that reduction, there's like some other word that like kind of takes the top spot.
Yeah. Well, and then the only other point of comparison I have is that in like natural language processing in data science, usually we remove what you call stop words. So stop words are all of these words like the, and, of, I, like all the stuff that like we're probably not interested because we want to get to like the verbs and the nouns and stuff like that. If you remove those, the power law relationship goes away. It turns out it's very important that you have all of these stop words, and I can pull up a list of all of them if you're curious, but it's exactly the most common words you would think of. And if you remove that pattern disappears almost instantly. Now, go ahead.
I'm just imagining, those word cloud things that people make when they're like writing things in? That must have that filter on it.
It does.
Otherwise, okay. Just
you
imagining.
Do it and it's like of in big letters. Yeah. The few times I have dabbled in Wordle land, you're just like, oh damn it, I forgot to take out the and it's huge. Or like, so I tried that when I was in grad school. I studied Chinese politics, and I was like, I'm going to analyze all the New York Times coverage of China and then Chinese coverage of China, and the big result was just China in big letters. And you're like,
nuts.
At least I collected the right documents. Like, I definitely got the ones about China. Like, let's filter that out. So usually you take out the stop words, and then you take out any custom words like, that everyone would use. So this has been around since Zip wrote his book in 1949. And it's fascinating because it works for so many languages, and it's like, it works for English, and it really is eerie to see it work for your own languages. But the other reason it's fascinating is because it applies to a million other phenomena that have been discovered since that are not related to language. And on top of all of that, it turns out that Zip is not the person who discovered this, but Zip gets all the credit for this. So it actually was someone named Felix Auerbach. I don't know how to say his last name. Aurbach. A few decades before. Thank you. Before Zip. And Zip actually just wrote his book trying to explain why we have this power law. And he said many times in his book, I did not come up with this. Felix Auerbach came up with this. It's not me. And everyone was like, well, call it Zip's law. So like to this day, it's Zip's law and Zipfian distribution. And it's this dude Felix, like 20 years before, who found it.
So that guy, he also invented the fall daylight savings time, not the spring one, though. Because in the spring, it's an hour forward, but in the fall, it's an hour back.
Oh, Jesus.
Whoa.
I knew you were gearing up for something that would be painful. That is incredible.
I was fully reeled into that. I was like, well,
Wow.
how did that work? What? Wow.
Well done. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah. I hope your sound is being recorded perfectly for that. We can't rely on Zoom recording for that. So zip laws and power laws apply to. I used wealth as an example. It turns out it applies to the size of cities. So some cities are massive, and most cities are very, 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 very small. It applies to the size of like earthquakes. Depending on your measurement, forest fires, though they might be a slightly different distribution. It applies to the size of solar flares. It applies to the popularity of people on the internet, like number of followers you have. It applies to book sales, movie sales, anything where you could have like a hit. Like Harry Potter is at the top, and most books sell like one copy. And so there's all kinds of things that follow this distribution. And so after it started with language, which I think is cool, like just counting up the and e, and you end up at solar flares. And so since then, people have been trying to figure out, well, why does anything follow this pattern, right? Like when we think about something is following a normal distribution, like you have a sense of what the pressures are that keep someone from being super tall or super small. But in a power law distribution, sometimes we call it a scale-free distribution. It's like there's no limit to how big or popular something could be, even though most are really small, right?
Right.
And so everyone was like, oh my God, we have discovered like a theory of everything. Like if we can explain why like the word the is used so often and solar flares take on this property and earthquakes and wealth and all these other things, the popularity of names is another one that follows this trend, then we can understand the whole wide world. And Zipf's explanation is my favorite. It was the principle of least effort is his explanation. And everything after that is like these beautiful mathematical properties that we can talk about if you want. But Zipf's is basically like speaking is hard, understanding is hard. We like to use short words, and we use the same ones a lot if we can help it. And so he's like, that's why we just say the same like 20 words over and over and over again, and then occasionally fill it in with all the rest. The only languages, it turns out, that don't follow Zipf's law, and this was only done to talk about a few biases in this area of research. This is like 2013 this came out, right? So like forever later. If you look at character-based languages, so like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, it doesn't quite follow Zipf's law. It does to an extent, like there are a few characters that are used a lot more than others, but it's not that like same like very, very sharp decline from like a few really popular ones. And then, I mean, in English, there's just basically infinite words from there, right? And the reason it's this kind of truncated one is that there's only about 4,000 characters, like in Mandarin, that are in regular use. So, like, that long tail can't go forever, effectively. And the same is true in Japanese and Korean, even though Chinese and Japanese and Korean use characters differently, right? Some are phonetic versus, like, symbolic, and so on. So, but it's like kind of astounding to me that this law has been around forever. It's been studied by like linguists, physicists, mathematicians, statisticians, like every field has like gotten involved because those are all the fields. I named all the fields. And only like 7 or 8 years ago, people were like, what about the other languages that like the whole world speaks? How about those? And
the other 2/3 of humanity. Like.
Yeah, exactly. And the very last thing I want to say about this, to tie it back, Rob, to yours, is that organizations like SETI, like the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, and trying to understand animal communications, basically all these big radios and trying to understand if anything that any animal is saying or intelligent life might be saying, how do we know if it's language if we can't understand it? Basically, they're out there looking for Zipf's law to be produced in these languages to tell if like the sounds that dolphins are making when they squeak at each other are actually language, or if like the random waves that come through our whatever satellite, I don't know anything about space, right? Whatever satellites that we're listening to space through, if it ever forms a pattern that maps to Zipf's law, that suggests that we might be listening to a language. That said, we also, if it doesn't map, we might be listening to Mandarin. So it's hard to say.
It's interesting because it's so strange though, because people were so excited about it as some sort of universal principle that they were like, let's listen for anything that conforms to this, and then shouldn't they find everything conforms to it? I mean, I know that didn't really pan out, right? But like as a concept.
Well, it's kind of like what exactly, but it's kind of like what you were saying with the monkeys, where it's like, there's some sort of intelligent life responding, and so it falls into this pattern. And in the case of the monkeys, it's a bunch of S's and throwing excrement at computers and things like that. But there, it's like if you're forming a language, it should all conform to this slope, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
What if aliens did send us like a message and it was just like
Maybe they did. Maybe that was it. But I actually, Rob, so I was wondering if Yerkish follows the power law distribution. I would imagine not.
Yeah, and I think just because it's such a closed set, because it's basically a character based, and it's also, like I said, only 150 or so. So I feel like the constraint of size would really prevent it.
Yeah.
Although I guess it depends how hungry your bonobos are, because if they say food a lot, then like that's going to be
That's true.
Yeah.
They create a power distribution just based on having singularly tracked minds.
It would probably be, like at least somewhat like sloped that way. Basically, to be a power law distribution, it has to like have a certain exponent. And so even the character-based ones don't get there because you're kind of truncating the number of words that you use.
Yeah, and so this was just a pure fancy that I Googled, which is, do emojis follow Zipfian distribution?
Ah, cool.
And so I literally Googled emoji Zipf, which it's not the first link you get when you Google that, but actually like the second one leads me to this paper published in 2019, The Grammar of Emoji, Constraints on Communication in Cognitive Research Principles and Implications.
Yes.
And so your short answer is yes.
Cool.
It looks like the top 6 emojis follow a Zipfian distribution. And then there's like, I think after that, yes, but I can't see enough / don't understand enough.
Yeah.
But in scrolling through this academic paper, it is littered with emojis.
That's
and it's
so great.
Really interesting to read. And I just caught this one. I saw it and then went back and read this sentence. And so the sentence, which I think is for no other reason than because the authors couldn't be talked out of it, say, for example, Denesi gives the example of how the utterance bombshell bikini could be formed with bomb emoji, conch emoji, bikini emoji.
Oh my God. So that's how people use emojis. Hang on. So what's the most common? Every now I was gonna say something ageist. I won't, because every now and again I do see people do that, and it's not my generation. But okay, extrapolate. It's not my generation. Wow, really defensive. What are the most common
back
emojis?
in my day?
Yeah.
So annoyingly, the table just says emoji 1, emoji 2. It doesn't actually show what they are.
What?
Yeah,
This
I know.
is typical scientists not realizing the fun part of their study. Now I'm hating on scientists. I'm really going after whole groups today.
Yeah. They then do this thing, instead of like, the next figure is not like a piggyback on that to tell you. It's actually, it talks about grammar of the emoji, which is like kind of what I just said, is actually a rebus, like compound word.
Yeah.
To be like an adjective that is a bomb in a shell, and then a bikini, which is obviously the only thing that a bombshell would be describing. Thanks. I can't tell the gender of all the authors on this, but I have a guess.
Yeah.
But so they then talk about like basically 1 unit emojis versus linear grammars versus like categorical grammars, which is like kind of cool to think about, I guess. But yeah, at no point do they bother to tell you, despite the fact they describe at least 12 emojis, and then they play what essentially I think is going to be a trivia game in Figure 3, where they ask a person to basically take an idea and text it to someone else, and then they have to basically, the first person writes what it meant and the second person writes what it meant, and then they compare answers.
Huh.
So
it sounds like they have a misunderstanding of how I think most people use emojis, which is like in addition to text, not to replace text, right?
Yeah, it's not a rebus. Like,
yeah.
It's
modern hieroglyphics. Like, no.
Yeah.
It's literally a paper that's like trying to understand something that any 15-year-old could explain to them.
Yeah.
But like,
wow. Okay, boomer. Okay.
Yeah. That had a lot of promise when you read the title, but they have revealed that they have no understanding. It's like, does anyone post on Twitter a study? You're like, okay. There are other cool measures of language that made me think of that are like, how do you tell how like complex or readable or difficult a text is? And we use a lot of these measures when we say this is 3rd grade reading, 4th grade reading, etc. My students at NYU, I'm making them do a project right now. And one person did a study to find out how complex or readable his text was. And it turns out one of the main measures that you use is how long a sentence is and how many syllables are in words in those sentences. And he forgot that he had gone through and removed all the punctuation. And so the result was just like, this is the most complex text in the whole world, because it was like the world's longest sentence. So the score is usually like from 1 through 12, and the number was like 80,000 or something like that. And then he was like, oh, I left the punctuation out. So, right. So that comma, that stopped working. It's making all my sentences more complex.
That seems like something the code would ideally have like a stop for.
Yeah.
To be like, at this point, it's not a sentence anymore.
Not possible.
Yeah. Like we maxed out. I don't know I'm sure there's a documented longest sentence. I don't know. Well, there's one like Moby Dick is one of the more difficult like texts out there, and so that it has a pretty high number. But there's one paragraph within Moby Dick. I haven't read Moby Dick myself, but there's one paragraph about a shark that does rate at like difficulty of like 150. Like it actually is off the scale because it's such an insane paragraph. So there are sections that are more difficult. The simplest one is I think green eggs and ham. I don't know if we want to get into Dr. Seuss territory here, but that's one of the simplest.
Not in today's political climate.
Yeah.
Okay, we have finally made it to the quiz, and it is a quiz, as listeners will know, loosely inspired by the theme, and the theme this episode is language. So these will all be questions where, very often the answer might be a language, the name of a language itself. Sometimes the language might be given to you in the question, and I want to know something interesting about that language or its history, etc. So, question 1. What language boasts the oldest vernacular literature in Western Europe and the second oldest literary tradition among living European languages?
The oldest written literature?
Vernacular literature in Western Europe. And the second oldest literary tradition among living European languages.
What do you mean by second oldest? Longest history of writing things down and is still
in the way that in
by
vernacular would be like in the way that people would have talked. So like, for example, Latin would have been like sort of the literary language or like, ecclesiastical language, but not necessarily the spoken language
right
day to day. So this would be a language that has literature in the language of the people.
Right.
So I feel like sounds like a Celtic kind of
thing. I was going that direction too. It's something one of the Isles or something.
Well, you've got 6 Celtic languages to choose from. Can you name them all? That'd be a good question.
Oh wow. You've got Welsh, Gaelic, Scots?
Scots is a dialect of English.
Oh, okay.
Scottish Gaelic is
Scottish Gaelic. Okay. And then 3 others.
Yeah, I was going to say Welsh and Gaelic were all I had.
Is there a language from the Isle
Irish.
of Man? Is that its own?
Yeah, Manx. Manx,
yeah.
And then also the last one that I've mentioned, I don't know if this has even made it into the 50th episode, but is in the northwestern bit of France. There's in Brittany, there's a language which is Celtic called Breton, and it's actually similar to Welsh. And one you missed was just Cornish.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which is a resurrected language. But what is the language? What is the language that boasts the oldest vernacular literature in Western Europe and the second oldest literary tradition among living European languages?
I'm putting my money on Welsh.
I mean, Welsh is very close to Noah's heart, so that makes a ton of sense. But I just like the sound of the word Manx coming out of my mouth.
I'm going for Welsh because he smirked when you suggested it.
Okay.
My main reason was on The Crown, there's a whole episode where they talk about the proud, independent spirit of Wales and the Welsh language. So that's my literary contribution to this.
Welsh is a great guess. It has a very proud literary tradition. The answer is in fact Irish. Cool. It is Irish as the literary tradition of Irish goes back to like early, Common Era. It's maybe I think first couple hundred, maybe 300 to 400 CE. There was of course a lot of Latin influence in the culture. There has been a long and proud tradition of vernacular literature in Ireland. So that's the Irish language. So question 2, where are the languages Sindarin, Quenya, and Kudzul spoken?
Okay, Kenya, like Kinya.
It's Quenya.
Ooh.
And then the third one is Khuzdul. They are all spoken in one place, broadly speaking.
Earth?
It may. Yes. Any particular part of Earth?
I actually was thinking something like the El Alto area of like Bolivia, like the Altiplano or something, where it's like there's like Quechua and a couple others. I'm just getting probably hung up on the Q's.
Yeah, no, I did that too. With the Kiwi, I was like, that sounds South American then.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is this Middle Earth?
You're goddamn right
Oh, come on.
it is. Well done, Rob. Well done.
Okay.
I'm so glad you got that. I was really worried.
Well,
Cinderin.
I
should have known.
Yeah.
Cinderin, I was like,
should've
okay,
known.
so where's Sindar? And I was like, Sindar? Wait a minute.
So yes, these are three languages invented by J.R.R. Tolkien, who Sindarin is an Elvish language that was actually very basically just ripped off from Welsh, which is going to be a running theme. It may not be. Quenya is another Elvish language, which is largely inspired by Finnish, Latin, and ancient Greek. And Kudzul, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, is actually a Dwarvish language, largely inspired by the Semitic languages. And something really interesting about J.R.R. Tolkien that I learned was, so he was an academic, and his field was philology, which is the study of language in oral and written historical sources. And so if you've read The Hobbit and then we've read The Lord of the Rings, you'll notice that there's a very different tone, and that The Lord of the Rings is sort of much darker and sort of more violent and scarier, whereas The Hobbit is much, kind of sillier and more fanciful and cute almost. And the real reason for that is that, Tolkien wrote The Hobbit first, and it was sort of had, I guess, kind of kids in mind. But the way that basically he sort of retconned that was that he is a philologist, and he studied sort of these, ancient texts and translated them and studied, how they related to culture. And the way he described it basically was that he did not write The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. He discovered the texts and translated them. And The Hobbit was written to be told to children. It's the version of the story that was made more palatable for children listeners, basically. And that he is basically just sort of revealing this story through his sort of like, that's like the, the sort of like wink inside joke, right?
Oh, cool.
But I thought that was really cool because it brings in his like real academic field,
That's
right?
very cool.
Yeah.
So he
question
plagiarized.
3.
Got it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He plagiarized.
Translated by
he not
J.R.R.
only
Tolkien.
didn't plagiarize, but he claimed that he did.
Yeah.
He played himself.
Yeah.
Doubled. Yeah. Very sneaky.
Okay, so question 3. What language, one of the most studied languages in American universities, uses eyebrow positioning for questions?
American Sign Language, probably.
That's absolutely right.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Nice.
If it's sort of kind of obvious when you think about it, it's the one where there's sort of more than just words spoken. Of course, spoken languages typically involve a lot of gesture and a lot of like understanding what people are saying. Involves a lot of like reading facial cues, and that's why there can be challenges. And as we were discussing before, potentially not gonna make it into the episode, but let's just say in the green room we were talking about how sometimes if you don't put enough exclamation points, people will think that you hate them in an email.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that facial expressions like smiling while you say something, or gesturing vigorously, pointing out something, can disambiguate an otherwise ambiguous language. That's certainly not restricted to ASL, but it's something that is like a really important feature of ASL and other sign languages. So something I've been learning about recently, and I think it's just an interesting fact as well as important to bear in mind when you're learning about various different sign languages, is that they are not forms of English. Like, for example, American Sign Language is not English with your hands. It's like it's like a language completely original and like for its own community, right, coming out of their needs and developing out of that, right? So there are also, what this sort of creates an interesting scenario for those of us who use spoken English, where like the British Sign Language is quite different from American Sign Language. They're not related to each other in the way that, American English and British English are entirely mutually intelligible. They only have about 30% of their signs that are related to each other. But one thing that really sums up how different they are is the sign for deaf person in American Sign Language is the same as the sign for hearing person in British Sign Language.
Wow.
So just, when you learn about sign languages in the future, know that the spoken language relationships are not similar, in part because of the development of sign languages in deaf communities around the world hasn't really followed the same maps that sort of spoken languages have. Question 4. What language, initially invented by James Doohan and fleshed out by Mark Okrand? Oh, I didn't finish this question. Oh no. oh no.
What a cliffhanger.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. All right. What language initially let's just see what happens at the end of the sentence when I read it again. What language, initially invented by James Doohan and fleshed out by Mark Okrand?
Is it Esperanto?
I know.
That's my guess as well. Or the other one. What's the other one?
Let me say this differently. Invented for a television show.
Oh.
What language was initially created by James Doohan and fleshed out by Mark Okrand?
Vulcan?
Ooh, interesting.
That's cool.
Vulcan. Final answer? Based on my response, I assume not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My final answer, but not the right one, apparently.
I feel like Esperanto is made for practical purpose and not television.
Yeah, I think they meant for us
so.
to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a universal language that wouldn't be difficult to converge upon.
If you go to Tiananmen Square in China and you can take an audio tour, you buy a ticket to go walk around, and it's they have all the languages. It says, I've never tried it, but you can get an audio tour in Esperanto.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. Finally, right?
The one place that it's left.
So this is a television show. James Doohan was a actor on the television show. He's Canadian, but he played a Scottish character.
James
Does that narrow
Doohan.
it down? Yeah.
I mean, is that Scotty and it is just another Star Trek language?
It is Scotty.
And
it's
Klingon.
Trek. Klingon is
Okay.
James
Yeah.
Doohan.
Right universe.
and I don't know if Vulcan is a full language in the way that Klingon is.
I meant Klingon, but don't know enough about Star Trek, and was like, isn't it Vulcan? Right?
When you said
But-
Vulcan,
yeah.
I imagined Klingon. I was like, right, the main
Yeah.
one. I also don't know about Star Trek.
Fittingly,
so
just
Klingon,
got lost in translation.
Klingon is a full-fledged invented language. I mean, it's possible to be fluent in it.
Cool.
You could live your life in Klingon. I'll get to that in a second. I just
Okay.
wanted to mention that in Erica Ockrent's book, In the Land of Invented Languages, it is estimated that there are around 20 to 30 fluent speakers of Klingon. And one Klingon speaker in particular, Darman Spears, raised his son Alec to speak Klingon as a first language.
Jesus.
The boys. So Alec's
okay.
mother communicated with him only in English, so he at least got that.
Okay.
Because
good.
I was does he speak English with a Klingon accent? Is that a thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it sounds like Darman Spears thought this was a great idea and nobody else did. So it says Alec rarely responded to his father in Klingon, although when he did, his pronunciation was, quote, excellent. After Alex's 5th birthday, Spears reported that his son eventually stopped responding to him when spoken in Klingon, as he clearly did not enjoy it.
Wow.
And then another thing was in 2007 in Multnomah County, Oregon, there were hiring Klingon translators for its mental health program, just in case patients came into a psychiatric hospital speaking nothing but Klingon. And so that was circulated wide and far, just to be that was circulated far and wide, I should say.
Wide and far is actually more of a direct Klingon translation. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My first language is Klingon.
Right, I understand.
So that was circulated far and wide, and a lot of derision. But basically, it was they just said, well, look, just in case this happens, we want to know if anybody in the area does speak this. And I think they did it for a lot of languages, and it's obviously never happened.
Yeah,
it's kind of like having a Jedi priest for prisons.
Yeah,
that occasionally is a thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Been there. Yeah.
So. And also, if you're interested, A Klingon Christmas Carol was the first play to be performed entirely in Klingon, and it's just a Christmas Carol in Klingon, and it's I would love to see it sometime. Not that I have the faintest idea how to speak Klingon, but I just think it'd be fascinating.
Can you do Klingon on Duolingo?
Yes.
Yes,
You can?
It is a
you
language.
Wow.
I don't know how like fleshed out the course is,
Yeah.
but it is one of the options.
All right.
I think it and
Valerian. from
Valerian, yeah.
Game of
Oh,
Thrones,
cool. All right.
And Esperanto. So they've got a few invented languages.
Nice.
There you go.
All languages invented. Okay.
It's actually emergent,
Question-
but we can talk about that another time.
Okay. Question 5. In the Zulu and Xhosa languages, what sounds do the letters C, K, and Q encode?
Are those the ticks, like the...
Yeah, different click sounds,
Yeah.
basically. So the C, Q, and K, as well as several diphthongs in Xhosa, like represent different click sounds. So there's different ways you can make the clicks, either like down the center or lateralized, mouth open, that sort of thing. And when written in a Latin script, the letters C, K, and Q encode those clicks.
Oh.
So I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Very cool.
Question 6. The English language is essentially a hybrid language, influenced by many waves of immigration and conquest. What 3 language families have the greatest influence on English, as defined by the number of English words derived from those languages? So you're just
Okay.
giving me top 3 influences on modern English today.
Of active languages?
Doesn't necessarily have to be.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Klingon.
German.
Klingon for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So Germanic.
German. I would say Latin.
Romance, yeah.
Romance. Can we say that?
Well, romance would incorporate both of them, both of the remaining 2.
Oh, okay.
And
So
Okay.
French
So
probably.
so it's definitely
Ooh,
French
I could
and
see
Latin,
French. Okay.
and you could absolutely argue that French is just sort of like Frankish Latin, plus
Yeah.
several thousand years, right?
Yeah.
And you would certainly be right, but they really are like a lot of English words are directly, sort of like the etymology is straight from Latin, and then a lot of etymologies, basically about 30% are for each Latin and French, are straight from French, and I think it's really, really interesting. Like, I had no idea how many times England was conquered.
Yeah.
I had no conception of the fact that it was like you had sort of like indigenous, Brittonic people, and that's the root of the Welsh language, for example. And then you had the Anglo-Saxons coming in that had this Germanic influence, and then you had the Normans, who were literally Norsemen or northern men who were a part of France where the Vikings settled, and they actually came after massive several 100-year-long period of Viking domination of Britain. And then so then you had this like French Viking sort of come in as well, and then you have of course had all this fascination with like classical languages, especially in those kinds of periods where like there was all this proliferation of new words in the modern English, which are, just basically ripped from Greek and Latin. So it's just this astounding, ridiculous hodgepodge of all these different languages, and some that are basically the same language, like Latin and French, just from different times, which is just very fascinating. So it is, so French and Latin, according to one study, about 29% each, and Germanic languages collectively about 26%.
Cool.
Wow.
Question 7. From whom, in 1800, is it said that naturalist Alexander von Humboldt learned the exclusively spoken language of the Arture people of Venezuela, 40 years after the last person who could speak it died?
Was it a parrot?
It was a parrot.
Yes, I
Wow.
love this story. Yeah.
Yeah. This story is that Alexander von Humboldt was visiting the Carib people in Venezuela, and he looked around. There were a bunch of like parrots that were just sitting on in cages or posts all around the town, and they were all just sort of chattering, and as parrots do, in the sort of local language, but except for one of them, which sounded very, very different. And apparently that was a quite old parrot that had been raised in an Arture village and could still speak that
Wow.
language. So the only at least the account of this story from Alexander von Humboldt is that the only words he could learn of that now dead language, because the people had essentially died out or been conquered, was from this parrot who had learned to speak it 40 years before.
Wow.
Or at least 40 years before.
And parrots do live forever. That's true, right?
They do live a long time, so it's certainly plausible.
It checks out, yeah.
And it's commonly considered to be more of like a parable. A parrotable? No.
I was like,
but
the word. Yeah.
However, pretty soon, like almost contemporaneously, so when Alexander von Humboldt came back to Europe, an edition of like sort of the account of his, studies had as follows: a tradition circulates among the Guahibos that the warlike Atures, pursued by the Caribs, escaped to the rocks that rise in the middle of the Great Cataracts, and there that nation, heretofore so numerous, became gradually extinct, as well as its language. The last families of the Atures still existed in 1767, which would have been about, 30 years before he got there. At the period of our voyage, an old parrot was shown at the Maipures, of which the inhabitants said, and the fact is worthy of observation, that they did not understand what it said because it spoke the language of the Atures. So it's not something, as a lot of times these stories could be, which was just sort of added to the biography of von Humboldt 100 years later.
Right.
This is something that at least was said roughly about the same time. So whether it's true or not, that's another story. But it at least is an interesting concept.
Wow.
And I kind of love the idea, as we had that fact about animals and humans communicating. I like the idea that an animal could help us, save an otherwise dead language.
The first voice recorder.
Yeah.
We'd start by teaching the animals all the least spoken languages in the world, just to be safe.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Quick,
Perfect.
send parrots to all these places.
Yeah.
The Treaty of Parrots.
Oh.
All right. So, final question. Question 8. Located in Wales and named in Welsh, what is the second longest one-word place name in the world?
Oh, no.
Oh,
I could give a
you've said it so
coffee.
many times.
God,
It's
I know.
Close. So I've told Emily and Rob this many times.
and it's like
What you're trying to get is the full name of the town, which is 52 letters long.
It's like the town by the stream, near the bridge, around the corner.
Yeah, so I will-
it's
I will tell you
descriptive.
I'll tell you what it means after I read it to you. I set you up on this question.
Good.
I'm so sorry. I'll do my best, Welsh listeners. I'm learning. I'm still a Welsh learner. Llanfair pwllgwyngydd gogera quandrobos Llantysilio go. And that has some of the best features of the Welsh language. For example, the double L that is one letter, technically, and that's a voiceless alveolar fricative, which is like that. And so there's actually one point where there are 4 L's in a row, because it's just 2 double L's, like the beginning and end of sort of conjoined words. And what that stands for is St. Mary's Church in a hollow of white hazel near the rapid whirlpool of the Church of St. Tysilio with a red cave. Yeah.
It is lovely.
And so there is this story, and it's not...
Wow.
It's another kind of one that may not be true, but there's a story that it was sometime in the 1800s. The town had a much shorter name. It was like Llanfairpwll, and the rest of this was added in order to make their train station the train station with the longest name in Europe, or something like that. So I don't know whether or not that's true, but it's I think worth looking into. But it's kind of cool. But there is now a list on Wikipedia of the longest one-word place names in the world, and Llanfairpwll is number 2. Number 1 is a Maori word that is 85 letters long, and which I certainly cannot pronounce, and I do not want to offensively just dive into it. But I will tell you the translation according to this Wikipedia list, which is fascinating. You should definitely check it out. The summit where Tamatea, the man with the big knees, the climber of mountains, the land swallower who traveled about, played his nose flute to his loved one.
Until the nose flute, it had a very Game of Thrones, Daenerys, breaker of chains, man with big knees.
Honestly. Well, exactly. There's just such a vivid mental image coming up for me, and then it's just
Yeah.
I think that was very beautiful. It was full of imagery. It's an extraordinary
That's
name.
so cool.
And I kind of love these long place names where in the place there's a whole beautiful poem, you know what I mean, that you can't help but recite every single time.
We should write poems for all the places that I was going to say that we live in,
Yeah.
because we're all in New York. So poem for New York City.
City where
the
dreams are made of.
Weird island surrounded by filth. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess Alicia Keys already beat us
Right.
to it. So
Street with the double parking where the trees are dying, where the church has grates on the window and the man pees on the bricks.
yeah.
There it is.
Yep. Yep. Speaking of, I walked by someone peeing just hours ago. So there's that.
That's
I
our
was like,
city.
oh, it is something. We're back. Yeah.
Well, it's in winter,
coming back.
Spring
in
has
winter, you're
sprung.
very
Yeah.
aware of all the dogs peeing because of the snow, and in summer, you're very aware of all
Yeah.
the people peeing because they're just outside having a drink. You know.
Just doing it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and with that, that's our show. A gigantic, enthusiastic thank you to our special guest, Andrea Jones-Rooy. And Andrea, where can our listeners learn more about you and see you in action as a comedian, a circus performer, or a professor?
Yes. Well, for the professor one, all you need to do is apply to New York University and then major in data science, and I'll see you in class. Otherwise, you can find me on the internet at Jones-Rooy on Twitter, Instagram, and jonesroy.com. So just my last name with no hyphen.
Outstanding.
Oh, yeah, and if the world ever exists, hopefully performing at Caveat, maybe in times when you are also performing. I just invited myself to
You
your
were
show.
welcome
Oh my gosh,
anytime.
please. Yeah.
Perform there.
I
Yeah.
would love Andrea's show at Caveat, it was called, and will be again, called Political Circus, which amazingly brings together all these incredible things that she does. And I think a crossover episode of Political Circus and Fax Machine would be amazing.
Oh,
yeah.
man. Too cool.
Done. Yeah.
All right, so if you want to learn more about us or to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Fax Machine Pod and on Facebook at Fax Machine Podcast. And individually, we're on social media. I'm at Arcs and Sciences, M,
At _EM Costa.
and Rob.
At Sweatervest SCI.
Fax Machine is produced by Noah Giberson, Rob Farley, and M. Costa, with editing by Noah Giberson. The theme music is by AC Antonelli, and our logo was designed by Mike Zola. Thanks for listening. Bye!
Bye!
That actually was perfect.